The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of fire and shadow. Every ridge of rock and bend of sand seemed to hold a secret, as though the land itself whispered warnings to those who dared to cross it. She pressed herself against the edge of a fallen mesquite tree, her hands trembling and her chest rising with shallow breaths. The wind carried the scent of smoke and leather, the tang of horses and distant campfires. She wasn't alone. She knew it the moment the shadow fell across her, long and still, stretching over her like a dark promise. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, voice soft but steady, careful not to betray all the fear thrumming in her veins. Her eyes met his, sharp and unreadable, the dark gaze of an Apache warrior who had seen more battles than she could ever imagine. His presence was overwhelming, the quiet strength in the set of his shoulders, the tautness of muscles ready to spring into action. And yet there was something else, something gentler, that lingered beneath the rough edges of his form. She had wandered too far from the wagon trail, too far from the small settlement she had called home since she could remember. Every warning from the townsfolk about the Apache, about the wild lands that stretched beyond the last wooden fence, had replayed in her mind. But curiosity, stubbornness, or perhaps fate itself had led her here to this moment. And now, faced with the warrior, every heartbeat thudded against her chest like a drum in a tense ritual. The Apache did not speak at once. He only studied her, tilting his head slightly as if weighing her words against some unseen measure. The desert held a silence heavy enough to press against her skin, yet it was not empty. Somewhere beyond the ridges, a horse whinnied, a coyote called, and the wind traced the sharp edges of rock in low, haunting whines. Her fingers dug into the rough bark beneath her, nails scraping lightly as if that touch alone could anchor her to the world she knew. "I will not hurt you," he finally said, voice low and controlled. The sound carried authority, yet there was no threat, only a careful balance of warning and restraint. She wanted to believe him. Every instinct screamed that he could not be trusted, yet the calm in his words, the stillness of his frame, offered a strange, fragile thread of hope. She took a cautious step backward, brushing sand from her skirt, eyes darting around for any sign of danger. The world beyond them seemed poised on the edge of some unseen peril. She could hear the faint clatter of hooves over distant stones, the rumble of men moving through the twilight, and the sharp, tense hiss of wind through the canyon. It felt as though the desert itself held its breath, waiting for something inevitable to break its fragile calm. He followed her movements without haste, careful and deliberate. Not once did he raise a hand in threat. His long braid swayed slightly with each step, and the light of the setting sun glinted off the beads and feathers woven into it. There was pride in the way he carried himself, a history of survival written into every line of his face. She could not name the fear and fascination tangled in her chest. The man was a warrior, a figure carved from the harsh realities of the land, and yet, in his quiet presence, she sensed an unexpected protector, an unexpected guardian. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. She forced herself to speak, though every muscle in her body urged her to run, to vanish into the shadows before it was too late. He did not answer directly. Instead, he motioned toward the canyon ahead, eyes dark but steady, and then back to the distant ridges where smoke curled faintly against the sky. "Danger follows," he said finally. "Not all come with clear faces." His words hung in the air, and though she did not fully understand, a chill traced her spine. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? Was this a test, a trap, or some cruel joke of fate? She had heard stories tales whispered around campfires of settlers lost, taken by the wild, their cries swallowed by the night. And yet here, standing before this man who might have been the embodiment of those very fears, she felt the weight of something different. His eyes were steady, unwavering, and when he looked at her now, there was no malice. Something unspoken passed between them, a thread of understanding in a world that had always seemed to offer none. The desert seemed to shift around them, shadows stretching and contracting as the last of the sunlight dipped below the far ridges. Birds called once, and then fell silent. The land held its breath again, waiting. Her stomach knotted as she realized that her choices had narrowed, her paths had dwindled. She could not return to the trail she had lost, could not face the unknown wilderness alone. And yet, with him, there was a chance, a sliver of hope, that perhaps she could survive what was coming. He extended a hand slowly, deliberately, an offer she had not dared to expect. Her eyes flicked between his face and the hand, every nerve in her body quivering. Trust was a dangerous thing in these lands. She had been taught to rely on herself, to fear strangers, to assume that every shadow carried intent. And yet, in that moment, something primal whispered that she had no other choice. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant fires, as if the desert itself urged her forward, toward him. Her fingers brushed his hand, tentative, testing the reality of it. The contact sent a shiver up her arm, a connection so fragile yet grounding that she barely dared to breathe. He held her gaze, steady and calm, a silent promise that he would not break. Around them, the desert's danger pulsed faintly, the echoes of hidden threats waiting just beyond the edge of vision. She could sense them, figures moving through the rocks, shadows flitting along the canyon walls, but for the first time she felt a presence beside her that could face them. "You shouldn't have come alone," he said quietly, almost to himself, voice carrying a warning laced with concern. The words were simple, but the weight behind them made her stomach twist. Her curiosity, her stubborn need to see the world beyond the safe fences of her small settlement, had led her into this moment, and she now saw the cost of it. Yet there was no blame in his tone, only acknowledgement, a measured caution that spoke of battles fought and lessons learned. Her heart pounded as she realized that whatever was coming would test them both. She did not fully understand the danger, did not know the intentions of those who might be tracking her, yet the sense of urgency pressed down like the heat of the afternoon sun. She felt both fear and a strange thrill, a pull toward the unknown, toward the man who had emerged from legend and story into the reality of her life. The first star blinked faintly in the violet sky, and the desert grew colder as night crept over the land. She shivered, not from the chill but from anticipation, the unspoken tension that had built between them. The Apache's eyes never left hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, to the fragile trust forming in silence. Then movement caught her attention, a flicker of shadow along the canyon rim. Her heart leapt. The warrior's head snapped toward the same direction, senses sharp and alert. The air between them shifted instantly, the fragile calm shattered by the unmistakable presence of danger. Her hand tightened around his, a small, desperate anchor as her mind raced. Whatever was out there, it was not just the wild desert, not just the stories she had heard. It was something immediate, something real. "Stay close," he said, voice firm now, commanding. The gentleness of before was gone, replaced with a sharp edge, the instinct of a protector ready to spring into action. She nodded, barely trusting herself to speak, her fingers gripping his hand tighter. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke, dust, and a hint of leather from distant riders. Shadows twisted across the canyon floor, growing longer as the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon. She knew then that her life, once predictable and simple, had changed in an instant. The world she thought she understood, the safety of the settlement, the limits of her small existence, was gone. All that remained was the man before her, the Apache who might protect her, and the unknown threat closing in from the darkness. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. I trust you," she said, voice barely audible but carrying the weight of her choice. It was a simple declaration, yet in that barren landscape, it was the most dangerous thing she could have done. The Apache did not speak, only nodded once, the motion precise and deliberate. He shifted slightly, eyes scanning the horizon, ready to act at a moment's notice. Around them, the desert settled into an uneasy silence, the tension palpable, and the first night shadows of unseen dangers stretched long and hungry across the rocks. She realized then that there would be no turning back. The night, the desert, the dangers that lurked just out of sight, they were all part of a world she had never known, and yet she was now bound to it, bound to him. The connection, fragile and new, held the promise of survival, of understanding, of courage. But it also held the uncertainty of what lay ahead, the threats she could not see, the choices she would be forced to make, and the trials that would test every ounce of her resolve. A low whistle carried on the wind, distant but deliberate, a warning that sent a shiver down her spine. She tightened her grip on his hand. He adjusted his stance, muscles coiled and ready, eyes scanning the edges of the canyon. Whatever was coming, it would not wait. The desert had revealed only the first hint of its secrets, and now, as the darkness deepened, she understood that the story of survival, of trust, and of courage was just beginning. Her breath came in small, careful bursts. She did not look away from him. She could not. He was her shield, her guide through the uncertain night, the anchor in the storm of unknown dangers. And as the first distant echoes of movement reached her ears, she realized with a quiet, pounding certainty that everything had changed. The night had begun, and with it, the test of trust, the fight for survival, and the bond that could either save her or cost her everything. The desert waited, silent and unforgiving. And in that waiting, she found both fear and a strange, flickering hope. The wind shifted again, colder now, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood or perhaps only the memory of old skirmishes etched into the rocks. She kept close to him, every step measured, every rustle of sand underfoot sounding far too loud. Her eyes darted across the canyon, tracing shadows that seemed to move with purpose, and she felt the full weight of the desert pressing down. The Apache never faltered, his movements precise, silent, yet commanding. She tried to remember the stories the settlers had whispered about the Apache, about the wild lands, about the impossible skill and relentless courage of those who belonged to them. In the stories they were fierce, untouchable, merciless. Yet this man beside her carried none of that cruelty, only a careful watchfulness, a controlled strength that somehow made her heart steady. She wondered why he had appeared. Was it chance, fate, or some instinct honed over years of survival? She could see the scars along his arms, the faded marks on his face, and she knew they told a story she would never fully understand. Every line was a lesson learned in blood, every muscle trained for endurance and war. And yet, the gentleness he showed her, the patience in his eyes, spoke of a code she had only glimpsed in the tales of the frontier, the unspoken honor of protecting those weaker, the promise of loyalty that ran deeper than any law written on paper. The canyon stretched on ahead, twisting like a snake, sharp ridges and hidden gullies hiding who knew what dangers. She could feel the eyes of the land on her, the way the desert seemed to observe, to wait, to judge. Somewhere in the darkness, movement flickered, subtle and deliberate. Her stomach tightened, a warning she could not ignore. She had learned the hard way that fear could be a teacher, that every sound, every shadow, could mean the difference between life and death. She tried to calm her mind, but every instinct screamed at her to stay alert. He stopped suddenly, one hand raised, the other brushing lightly against the bow strapped to his back. She froze, heart pounding, as his eyes scanned the darkness. There was no panic in his gaze, only calculation. "Something moves," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not far," she swallowed, forcing herself to breathe steadily, her eyes straining against the dim light. "What is it?" she whispered. "Could be men," he replied, tone neutral but wary. "Could be worse." Her pulse quickened. Men were one-thing riders, bandits, or scouts from the settlements, all predictable in their patterns. Worse meant something unknown, something she could not name, something that had no mercy or reason. She felt the weight of it settle over her like a cloak of iron. He moved again, silent and fluid, and she followed as best she could. Every step was careful, every footfall deliberate. The desert, once a place she had admired for its vast openness, now felt like a maze of threats, each shadow a potential enemy. The twilight deepened, and the first faint stars pierced the sky, cold and distant. She could hear the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the sharp snap of a twig, and every noise set her nerves on edge. As they moved, he spoke again, this time more to her than to himself. "You should know," he said, voice low, measured, "the land does not forgive mistakes. Every wrong step has a cost." She nodded, understanding more in the pause that followed than in any word she had ever heard. The silence that stretched between them carried its own lessons. She had lived a sheltered life, limited to the boundaries of a small settlement, fences, and safe paths. She had never known the desert as it truly was, alive and dangerous and unyielding. And now, with the warrior beside her, she was learning that survival was not about luck. It was about awareness, timing, and trust. "Why? Do you help me?" she asked after a long moment, her voice fragile. She had not dared to voice the question before, afraid that it would betray too much vulnerability. He did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted to the horizon, tracing invisible lines only he could see. Finally, he said, "Because it is right, and because you are here where you should not be. The land chooses sometimes who walks and who falls. I am the one who chooses to stand with you." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. She had never felt anything like this, an acknowledgement that she mattered, that her presence could be defended. And yet, even as hope flickered, the threat remained. The shadows along the canyon walls were not still, and every instinct she had screamed that the danger was not yet revealed. They stopped at the edge of a small rise, the rocks jagged and uneven beneath their feet. From this vantage point, she could see further into the canyon, the twists and gullies offering glimpses of movement. Figures or maybe illusions of movement shifted in the shadows, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. He crouched slightly, bow in hand, eyes scanning, muscles taut and ready. She mirrored him as best she could, trying to absorb every lesson in posture, in stillness, in waiting. "You will need to remember this," he said quietly, "always. Fear is not weakness. Fear is a signal. Listen to it, and it may keep you alive." She nodded again, determination hardening her features. She would not be a burden. She would not be someone who faltered. Survival had become more than instinct. It had become a responsibility, not only for herself, but for the man who had chosen to protect her. The stars overhead grew brighter, silver points against the velvet sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed through the canyon. The wind carried it to them, sharp and clear, and it reminded her that the desert was alive, full of creatures and men who moved unseen, all of them testing the boundaries of life and death. He stood, brushing dust from his clothing, eyes never leaving the dark folds of the canyon. "We move at first light," he said finally. "The night is the hunter's cloak. It hides more than it reveals." She wanted to protest, wanted to insist on moving now, on escaping whatever might be out there. But she understood the wisdom in his words. Night was a weapon, and the Apache knew how to wield it. She would follow, silently, learning as she could, trusting the instinct that had led her here. As they settled in to wait, she allowed herself a moment to study him more closely. He was not just a warrior, she realized, but a man shaped by the harshness of the land. The lines on his face told stories of battles fought and lost, victories claimed and honored, and a life lived on the edge of danger. She imagined the years it had taken to learn the desert, to read the wind, to anticipate threats before they arrived. And she realized that she was witnessing more than skill. She was witnessing a form of wisdom few would ever understand. A distant rustle made her flinch, and he immediately placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "Do not startle," he murmured. "Not all movements are danger, but all deserve attention." The night deepened, shadows swallowing the contours of the canyon, and she felt both exposed and protected, fragile and grounded, all at once. She did not know what awaited them, what figures moved unseen, what threats lurked just beyond the ridge. And yet she felt the faint, steady reassurance of his presence, the unspoken promise that she would not face the darkness alone. Her thoughts drifted to home, to the fences and simple routines she had known. The memory felt distant, almost unreal, compared to the immediacy of this world, the raw, unfiltered wild where life and death were intertwined, where trust had to be earned and defended with every heartbeat. She realized that the woman she had been yesterday would not survive this night. Only the woman who could understand danger, who could move with the land, who could trust the Apache beside her, would make it through. And yet, even as she steeled herself, her mind could not stop imagining what might be coming. Men? Bandits? Or worse? The desert held secrets older than any settlement, and some of those secrets moved with silent purpose. Every sound carried a question, every shadow a warning, and she knew that whatever she faced, it would test everything she had learned in hours that felt like lifetimes. The Apache crouched again, listening. He raised a hand slightly, signaling her to follow his movement. She obeyed, mimicking his motion, feeling the tension in her own body tighten and release like a spring. The world had narrowed again to the two of them, to the rhythm of breath, the shift of weight, the subtle play of light and shadow. She realized that trust was no longer a choice but a necessity, a lifeline in a land that would not forgive weakness. Then, from somewhere deeper in the canyon, a low murmur carried across the rocks. She could not make out the words, but the tone was deliberate, controlled, calculated. The Apache stiffened, senses alert. "They are close," he whispered, voice carrying an edge of warning. Her pulse quickened. The desert had spoken again, this time in a language older than any she had known, and she understood that the night was only beginning. Danger was near, and whatever it was, it would test them both. She pressed closer to him, letting the warmth and strength of his presence anchor her, and waited for the first sign, the first movement, the first act that would reveal the threat hidden in the darkness. Her thoughts raced, fear and anticipation entwined. She could not predict the outcome, could not know whether they would survive the night, and yet she did not shrink back. Something in the Apache's watchful eyes had taught her the first lesson of survival: presence, patience, and readiness. The night was long, the desert unforgiving, and the shadows full of secrets. She tightened her grip on his hand, feeling the steadiness beneath her fingers, and waited for what was to come, knowing that the dawn would not be kind, and that the choices made before it arrived would determine everything. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of sand and smoke, the echo of distant hooves, and a tension that made every nerve ache. She held her breath, listening, learning, understanding that the story unfolding was only the beginning, and that the desert had more to teach her than any place she had ever known. The night stretched on, unbroken, full of unseen watchers and hidden threats, and in that darkness she realized that she was no longer a girl lost in the wilderness. She was part of something larger, something raw and untamed, a story of survival and trust, of danger and courage, and she would have to rise to meet it if she hoped to see the morning light. The night pressed down harder as the hours passed, the darkness thickening around them like a living thing. She stayed close to the Apache, matching his movements as best she could, though every shadow seemed to flicker with menace. Her senses sharpened in ways she had never known, ears straining for the softest snap of a twig, eyes scanning for shapes in the blackness that shifted with the wind. The desert had become a world of threats, and every moment was a test of patience, awareness, and trust. He moved with purpose now, leading her along a narrow ridge that offered better sight lines but also left them exposed. She noticed the careful way he scanned the canyon, the way his hand hovered near the bow as if anticipating the instant something appeared. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, and silent, the rhythm of a man trained to survive in a land that gave no quarter. She could feel the difference between his presence and that of any ordinary person. Every movement, every glance, carried weight. He was not merely walking. He was reading the land, predicting threats, mapping the unseen. From the ridge she could see distant flickers of firelight in the valley below. She froze, heart hammering. "Who is that?" she whispered. "Men," he replied, voice quiet but firm. "Bandits or scouts from a larger group. Either way, they are dangerous." His eyes were sharp, scanning the patterns of light and shadow. "They hunt for travelers, for those foolish enough to wander alone. You were not meant to be here." Her mind raced. She thought of the small settlement she had left behind, the fences and narrow paths, the people who believed the land was tame. That danger could be avoided by staying within bounds. She realized now how naive that belief had been. The desert was alive, unpredictable, and it would test anyone who crossed it without respect. And yet, standing beside him, she felt some small measure of security, a fragile lifeline in a world that offered little mercy. The Apache crouched, lowering his body close to the ridge. "We will move under cover," he said. "The shadows are our ally. But you must stay quiet, follow my lead, and do not let fear control you. Fear is a tool if you learn to wield it." She nodded, swallowing hard, feeling the tension coiled tightly in her chest. She had never imagined survival required so much discipline, so much focus. The stories she had heard of the Apache, of their skill and endurance, had only hinted at what it truly meant to live in a land that offered no protection to the unprepared. She realized that this man, this warrior, was more than a protector. He was a guide into a world she had only glimpsed in legends and cautionary tales. As they moved, the distant flickers of fire grew closer, and she realized with a sinking feeling that they were approaching a larger camp, one that might hold dozens of men. Shadows moved around the flames, figures shifting in patterns that suggested planning, coordination, and intent. She could feel the weight of the danger pressing against her, the sense that discovery would be swift and deadly. The Apache lowered her behind a rock, his presence a steady anchor as he surveyed the camp. "They are armed," he said softly, "and watchful. Not mere thieves, they are organized. We must move carefully. One wrong step and they will see us." Her stomach twisted. She had imagined danger before, in fleeting moments of fear or curiosity, but this was different. This was immediate, pressing, unavoidable. The men below were not stories. They were real, alive, and poised to act with lethal intent. She could hear the clink of metal, the murmur of voices, and the low thrum of hooves on the packed earth. Every sound carved itself into her mind, each one a warning she could not ignore. He traced a path with his hand, indicating a route through the rocks that would bring them closer without being seen. She followed, muscles tense, heart hammering. Each step was a battle of nerves, balancing the need to move quickly with the need to remain hidden. She could feel the tension radiating from him, subtle but unyielding, and it grounded her in a way nothing else could. The Apache spoke in low tones, not to her but to himself, or perhaps to the land. "Tracks are fresh," he said, "and they have moved quickly, likely looking for someone or something. I do not like the feel of it." She dared a glance at him, catching the sharp edge in his gaze, the way his jaw tightened slightly. She realized then that the danger they faced was not only immediate but deeper, more calculated than simple bandits. There was a purpose here, a reason these men or others were searching. And somehow she was caught in the center of it, a target by circumstance or choice of fate. The ridge ended in a steep drop, and the Apache motioned for her to stay low. He slipped forward, silent as a shadow, and she followed, moving carefully, placing her feet exactly where he indicated. The rocks cut into her hands, rough and jagged, but she did not complain. Survival left no room for hesitation. Below, the camp came fully into view, a circle of fire surrounded by men and horses, tents and packs arranged with efficiency. She saw weapons leaning against rocks, figures standing guard, and a tension in the group that matched her own. Something about their movements suggested training, coordination beyond what a typical band of thieves would possess. Her mind raced with possibilities. Were they scouts for a larger war band? Mercenaries hired for some purpose she could not guess? Or something else entirely? The Apache crouched beside her, eyes scanning, calculating. "We have options," he said quietly, "but none are without risk. We may be able to move through them unseen. Or we may need to create a diversion. Your choice is to trust me completely." She swallowed, forcing herself to calm the panic that threatened to rise. She had already chosen, silently, to place her trust in him, to follow his guidance, and to act only as he directed. Yet the weight of the unknown pressed down on her, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. As they began to move along a narrow ledge, she caught movement at the edge of the camp, a shadow that did not belong. Her heart leapt. The Apache froze, hand on her shoulder, eyes narrowing. The figure below moved again closer, and she realized with sudden clarity that the threat was immediate, not distant. "They see us," he whispered, voice steady but tense. "Stay low. Do not make a sound." Her chest tightened. She had imagined confrontation before, but nothing like this. The figure below paused, scanning, and then moved toward the firelight. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the tension stretching between the ridges like a taut wire ready to snap. Every instinct screamed to run, but she stayed, pressed against the rock, guided by his calm presence, trusting that he would know what to do. The Apache's hand moved to the bow, pulling an arrow with smooth precision. His gaze never left the figure, calculating distance, wind, and angle. She realized then that every moment was a balance between life and death, and the stakes had never been higher. The world she had known, safe and predictable, was gone. Every sound, every shadow, every movement carried meaning, and failure was not an option. Suddenly, another figure appeared, moving from behind a tent, and her stomach dropped. The camp was larger than she had realized, more organized. Their chances of passing unnoticed had just diminished, and the desert that had seemed a protective ally now felt like a trap. She pressed closer to the Apache, hand gripping his arm, and felt the tension in him surge, a silent warning that the moment for stealth might be ending. He lowered his voice. "We may have to create a distraction. Prepare yourself. When I act, you follow exactly. Understand?" She nodded. Fear and determination entwined in her chest. There was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. The desert, the camp, the unknown men, they were all part of a test, and she had no choice but to rise to meet it. He moved then, swift and silent, slipping from rock to rock, arrow nocked and ready. She followed as best she could, shadowing his movements, heart racing with every step. The wind carried voices from the camp, distant and muffled, but clear enough to know the men were alert, aware of some threat. The desert had shifted again, and the night itself seemed to pulse with danger. A horse stamped near the fire, a voice called out, and she froze. The Apache pressed her against the ledge, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Wait," he whispered. "Do not move." She held her breath as the men below shifted, the firelight flickering across their faces. She caught glimpses of eyes, weapons, and movement, all precise, coordinated, purposeful. This was no random gathering. There was planning here, intent, a will to act that chilled her more than any shadow. The Apache adjusted, drawing another arrow, eyes sharp. "Now," he said, voice a soft command, and she moved as he had instructed, silent and deliberate, following his lead. The desert seemed to contract around them, the darkness alive with possibility, every shadow a potential threat. Her senses were on fire, every nerve alert, every instinct tested. She realized fully that survival was no longer about hope, it was about action, precision, trust, and courage. And as they descended toward the camp, every step bringing them closer to the unknown, she understood that the night held far more danger than she could have imagined, and that whatever happened next would change everything. The wind shifted again, carrying new sounds, horses, voices, the soft scrape of leather against rock. She pressed herself low, heart pounding, hand on the Apache's arm. He glanced at her, eyes dark and steady, and she saw the same resolve mirrored in him. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. But the desert held secrets yet, shadows that had not been revealed, men who moved unseen, and dangers that would test them beyond imagination. The night stretched on, unforgiving and alive, and she felt the weight of every choice, every movement, every breath. Trust, she realized, would be the only thing that could carry her through the coming storm, and even that might not be enough. The camp awaited, silent and watchful, and with it, the first act of a night that promised to test every lesson she had learned, every instinct she had honed, every ounce of courage she could summon. She gripped the Apache's arm tighter and followed, heart steadying in the rhythm of his steps, knowing that the desert had only begun to reveal its true nature and that the night was far from over. The night seemed to thicken as they crept closer to the camp, every step a careful negotiation with shadows that could conceal life or death. She pressed herself low against the rocks, heart hammering, following the Apache's lead as he moved like a shadow himself. His eyes were sharp, alert to every flicker of motion, every whisper of sound. The fires of the camp cast long, wavering light across the valley, illuminating figures only briefly before they were swallowed again by darkness. She realized with a sudden, chilling clarity how dangerous the world outside the settlement truly was. Every breath, every heartbeat, could betray them if they faltered. He paused behind a jagged rock, hand brushing hers in a silent signal to stop. His gaze cut across the camp, observing the movements of the men below. They were not merely resting. They were organized, alert, and ready. Every motion carried intent, every voice, even in whispers, seemed weighted with purpose. She swallowed hard, wishing she could see more than just flickers and shapes. The wind shifted again, carrying voices that made her stomach twist. "They have scouts further up the ridge," he said quietly, voice taut with attention he never admitted. "We must move carefully. One false move and they will see us, and then it will be chaos." She nodded, gripping his arm with both hands now, feeling the strength and control radiating from him. There was no room for hesitation. She had learned that survival was about precision, about following instinct guided by experience, and trusting those who knew the land better than she ever could. He moved first, descending the ridge with the careful patience of a hunter. She followed exactly, her every step measured, mimicking his balance, watching the way he read the terrain. The camp below seemed closer now, the flickering fires casting eerie shadows that made the shapes of the men look monstrous. Her breath caught as she realized how exposed they were and how quickly everything could unravel. A sudden clatter of metal echoed from below, and her heart jumped. One of the men had shifted a weapon, and for a brief moment their eyes lifted in their direction. She froze, hand pressed against the rock, hoping the shadows would hide her trembling form. The Apache moved instinctively, crouching lower, arrow nocked, eyes dark and steady. "They are watching," he whispered, tone controlled but sharp. "Prepare yourself. Stay low and do exactly as I say." The moment stretched, taut and sharp, until one of the men stepped away from the firelight, moving in a way that exposed the camp further. The Apache made a subtle gesture, and she understood he would act first and she must follow. She felt her pulse spike, the desert air thick in her lungs, every nerve alive with anticipation. Suddenly, the first arrow shot silently through the night. A shout rang out from the camp as the firelight flickered and one of the men dropped to the ground. Chaos erupted below, the shouts echoing off the canyon walls, hoofs stamping and weapons clanging. She pressed herself lower, her body tense, eyes wide as the Apache moved with lethal precision, striking with a skill that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Follow me," he commanded, and she obeyed without hesitation, moving through the shadows as he guided her. Figures surged in panic and confusion below, some fleeing, others scrambling for weapons. The wind carried the sounds of the sudden battle, harsh and immediate, and she realized how fragile the boundary between survival and disaster could be. They reached a cluster of rocks that offered some cover, and she crouched, struggling to catch her breath. The Apache scanned the camp, eyes dark with calculation. "We must move further," he said. "The center holds the leader. He controls the rest. We remove him, and the rest scatter." Her stomach clenched. This was no longer merely about evading danger, it was about confronting it directly, stepping into a firestorm of violence with no guarantee of escape. She pressed herself closer to him, feeling his strength, his focus, and the calm determination that anchored her own trembling courage. As they crept closer, she noticed the patterns of movement within the camp, the way the men communicated silently, signals passed with subtle gestures, orders relayed through voice or glance. They were disciplined more than bandits. Perhaps mercenaries, perhaps scouts for a larger force. And at the center, standing near the largest fire, a figure moved with authority, hand resting on a weapon. The leader. The Apache's eyes narrowed. "Stay close," he whispered. "Do not show fear. Do not hesitate. When the moment comes, you act as I direct." She nodded, gripping his arm with renewed determination. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, yet another part of her recognized the inevitability of confrontation. The desert had led her here, the Apache had guided her, and now they would face whatever was coming together. The leader's gaze swept the camp, sharp and deliberate, and she could feel the tension radiating outward, touching even the edges of the canyon where they crouched. The men were not merely fighters, they were organized, experienced, and dangerous. One misstep, one faint noise, and all would be lost. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the far edge of the camp. A small group of men ran toward the source, leaving their positions briefly exposed. The Apache's eyes caught the opening immediately. "Now," he said, voice low but commanding. She moved as he did, shadows swallowing them, hearts pounding in unison. The approach to the leader was tense, every step measured, every breath held. She realized she could hear the pounding of her own pulse, the rhythm of the night, the distant sounds of the camp and chaos. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would break or hold. As they drew closer, she saw the leader more clearly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a man whose presence commanded obedience even in panic. His hand rested on the hilt of a weapon, eyes scanning, calculating. She understood immediately that he would not fall easily, that removing him required precision, skill, and nerve. The Apache moved first, silent, deadly, his arrow finding its mark with quiet finality. The leader staggered, but not before drawing a weapon. Chaos erupted fully, men shouting, hooves clattering, firelight flaring in bursts of confusion. She pressed herself low, heart racing, following his every move, trying to anticipate, to survive, to act as he directed. A figure came toward them from the shadows, and she recognized one of the scouts who had been patrolling the ridge. Her breath caught. The Apache acted without hesitation, bow raised, another arrow flying true. The man collapsed silently, and she realized that every step, every decision, every movement was a battle between life and death. The center of the camp was now in disarray. Fires flared, men shouted, and the leader, wounded but not defeated, moved to rally his forces. The Apache pressed forward, leading her through the chaos, every motion precise, every action calculated. She followed, adrenaline and fear intertwining, learning in real time the lessons of survival, of trust, and of courage. They reached a point near the leader, close enough to act directly. She could see the determination in his eyes, the strength and resolve that had commanded the camp. She could also feel the weight of the moment, the risk that one misstep could undo everything. "Prepare yourself," the Apache said, voice low but urgent. "This is the final step. Follow my lead and stay close." There is no turning back. Her heart pounded. She could see the fear and determination mirrored in his gaze, the focus that had guided them this far. She realized that whatever happened next would define not only the night, but the choices that had led her here. The camp was a storm around them, men shouting, weapons raised, firelight flaring across the rocks. Every instinct screamed at her to act with precision, to trust, to survive. The leader raised his weapon, and the Apache shifted slightly, bow drawn, eyes dark with concentration. She pressed herself against him, ready to move at the exact moment, every nerve alert, every thought focused. The desert seemed to vanish around them, leaving only the camp, the leader, and the tense rhythm of life and death. She felt the fear rise, sharp and immediate, yet beneath it a fragile thread of confidence. The Apache had guided her this far, protected her, taught her how to move, how to read, how to survive. She would follow him, trust him, and act in unison with him. The leader took a step forward, shouting, rallying those who remained. The Apache shifted, arrow nocked, eyes never leaving the target. She mirrored him, muscles coiled, ready. The camp teetered on the edge of chaos, the night alive with threat, the tension unbearable. Every sound, every movement, every breath was magnified. The desert, silent and vast beyond the camp, seemed to hold its judgment. The fires flared high, shadows twisting across faces and weapons. She gripped the Apache's arm, knowing that the coming moments would demand everything she had learned, every ounce of courage and every shred of trust she had placed in him. The night waited, the camp waited, and she waited, heart pounding, senses alive, knowing that the moment of confrontation was upon them, that the climax of the night of danger, of uncertainty, was about to unfold. The tension stretched taut, every possibility hanging in the air, every decision critical. And then, as the leader moved to strike, the Apache whispered one last instruction, steady and precise. She inhaled sharply, muscles tight, ready for the act that would determine the outcome, the survival, the bond between them, and the future that had begun in the shadowed desert. The night held its breath with them, the desert waiting, the fires flaring, the chaos building, and the world poised on the edge of what would come next. The arrow sang through the night, striking true, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The leader's eyes widened in shock, his hand loosening its grip on the weapon, and the camp erupted into confusion. Men scrambled in every direction, hooves pounding, voices shouting orders that now came too late. The Apache moved with lethal efficiency, taking advantage of every opening, guiding her through the chaos. She stayed close, letting his strength and experience dictate her movements, yet for the first time she felt the rush of courage that came from knowing she was part of the fight, not just running from it. The fires cast flickering shadows over the valley, and she could see the remaining men hesitate, unsure of what to do. The Apache's voice was calm, controlled, even as he issued commands to her. "Stay low. Move with me. We are not done yet, but the tide has turned. Follow exactly." She obeyed, every motion precise, matching his rhythm. The camp had lost its order, and the fear in their eyes was palpable. As they pressed forward, they encountered the last pockets of resistance. Men tried to rally, but their cohesion was gone, scattered by the precision and speed of the Apache. She realized that fear could spread faster than courage, and in that moment, it worked in their favor. One by one, the obstacles melted away, leaving only the leader struggling to maintain control. He fell to the ground, wounded but not broken. The Apache approached carefully, bow lowered now, eyes steady on the man who had ruled the camp. "It is over," he said simply. "There is no need for more blood. You have lost." The leader's eyes flickered with anger, pride, and finally, resignation. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. The Apache turned to her, offering a hand to steady her. She took it, relief flooding through her as she realized the danger had passed. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night began to ebb, leaving exhaustion and a strange exhilaration in its place. The desert was quiet now, the fires burning low, smoke curling into the sky, and the stars stretched above them, vast and indifferent yet somehow comforting in their permanence. "You were brave," he said, voice quiet, almost a whisper. "You moved well. You trusted when it mattered. That is how you survive out here." She nodded, speechless, the weight of the night pressing against her still. She realized she had learned more about herself, about courage, and about trust than she ever thought possible. The Apache led her back up the ridge, away from the camp, toward the safety of the rocks that had shielded them before. She looked back once, seeing the scattered men, the dying fires, and she understood that the night had changed everything. Those who had sought to harm others would now reconsider, and the lessons of fear and consequence had been delivered. They stopped at a high ledge, overlooking the valley below. The first hints of dawn were brushing the horizon with pale light, washing the desert in soft colors that seemed impossible after the darkness and tension of the night. She breathed deeply, letting the cool morning air fill her lungs, feeling the weight of relief and accomplishment settle over her. "You survived," he said, eyes meeting hers, steady and unwavering. "And you learned. That is more important than any victory tonight." She smiled faintly, the first real smile since she had left her settlement, a small but bright flicker in the quiet morning. The Apache's presence was a steady reassurance, a reminder that not all the wildness of the desert was cruel, that some who belonged to it had honor, strength, and a capacity for protection. As they began the journey back toward safer grounds, she felt a shift within herself. Fear still lingered, for the desert would always hold danger, but it was tempered now by experience and the knowledge that she could rely on herself and others. The lessons of trust, patience, and observation would guide her in ways she could not yet fully understand. The Apache walked beside her, silent for a time, then spoke again. "There will be more dangers. The world is not forgiving, and people can be cruel. But you now carry knowledge that will serve you. Remember it, use it, and survive." She nodded, understanding fully that survival was not just about escaping harm, it was about preparation, awareness, and courage. The night had tested her in every way possible, and she had risen to meet the challenge. Every step forward now felt grounded, purposeful, and measured. As they walked, she began to understand more about the man beside her. He was not just a warrior. He was a protector, a guide, someone who had seen the desert in all its cruelty and beauty and chosen to navigate it with honor. His quiet strength had been a lifeline, and she felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. The settlement came into view at last, small and humble, but alive with the promise of routine and safety. She could see figures moving, unaware of the night's events, living in a world she now knew was sheltered, fragile, and precious. The contrast between the quiet life there and the chaos they had faced made her heart swell with understanding. She had glimpsed the rawness of survival, and now she returned changed, stronger, and more aware of the fragility and value of life. When they reached the settlement, the Apache paused, scanning the area for threats. Satisfied, he turned to her. "You have earned this rest. Remember what you have learned, but do not forget the importance of caution. Survival is a daily choice." She smiled at him, gratitude and admiration clear in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, then melted into the shadows once more, a silent guardian returning to the land he belonged to. She watched him go, heart full, understanding that some bonds could transcend words, formed in moments of shared danger and trust. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the desert. She felt it on her face, warm and steady, and she realized that the night had not only tested her but shaped her, preparing her for challenges yet unseen. Every scar, every fear, every victory had brought her here, and she would carry the lessons forward, stronger and wiser. She entered the settlement slowly, pausing to look at familiar buildings, paths, and fences that now seemed both comforting and confining. Life here would continue, but she would never forget the desert, the night, and the man who had guided her through it. Every instinct she had learned would now serve her, and she understood that courage, trust, and presence were the true tools of survival. Days passed, and the settlement returned to routine. She moved with newfound confidence, observing, learning, and growing. The events of the night remained vivid in her mind, a constant reminder of how quickly danger could arrive and how crucial it was to be prepared. She shared her story cautiously, emphasizing the lessons of awareness and courage, earning respect from those who had once seen her as naive or sheltered. And though the Apache had returned to the shadows, she felt his presence in every careful step, in every decision guided by the lessons he had taught her. She knew the desert still held dangers, and that the world could be cruel, but she also knew that she had the strength, the skill, and the courage to meet whatever came. In time, she began to find moments of peace, the rhythm of settlement life offering a reprieve from the intensity of the desert. Yet in the quiet hours, she would glance toward the horizon, where shadows and wind shaped the land, and remember the night that had changed her forever. The fear, the tension, and the triumph had shaped her, leaving a confidence that was quiet but unshakable. And somewhere in the distance, the Apache moved as he always did, a silent guardian in a world that demanded vigilance. She did not need to see him to know he watched over the land, guiding, protecting, and teaching in ways invisible but powerful. The bond forged in danger remained unspoken, enduring, and full of respect. The sun climbed higher, washing the settlement in warmth. She walked through familiar streets, her steps steady, her eyes clear. Every lesson from the night in the desert had been absorbed, every fear tempered by courage, every shadow met with awareness. She had faced the unknown and emerged stronger, ready for life, ready for whatever the future held. And in that moment, she understood fully the meaning of survival. It was not just avoiding danger, but learning, trusting, and finding strength in the bonds formed when life and death hung in delicate balance. She had been afraid, tested, and pushed to the edge, but she had emerged alive, transformed, and ready to embrace the life that awaited her. The desert lay behind her, wild and untamed, a place of memory, lessons, and respect. The settlement lay ahead, full of ordinary life, yet richer now with understanding, courage, and gratitude. She breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun, the solidity of the ground beneath her feet, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. Life would continue, but she was no longer the girl who had feared the shadows. She had walked with the Apache, faced danger, and learned that survival, trust, and courage could turn the darkest night into a foundation for hope. And as she moved forward, she carried with her the knowledge that even in the harshest desert, even in the face of impossible odds, life could be preserved, courage could triumph, and a heart could find strength beyond fear. The horizon glowed with promise, the settlement stirred with morning activity, and she felt a quiet smile touch her lips. The night of terror had passed. The lessons remained. And the world, though wild and unpredictable, seemed a little more knowable, a little safer, and infinitely more full of possibility. She paused, looking back one final time toward the desert ridge where shadows still clung to the rocks. Somewhere there, the Apache moved silently, watching, guarding, a reminder of the strength found in courage and loyalty. And she understood that though their paths might separate, the bond forged in danger was permanent, a quiet certainty that would endure beyond the night and beyond fear. With a steady step, she walked into the settlement, carrying the calm, the courage, and the lessons of the night. The desert had tested her. She had survived. And now, with the dawn illuminating every corner, she was free to live, to grow, and to embrace the world with the knowledge that fear could be faced, that trust could save, and that hope could endure even in the darkest night. The sun rose fully, washing the land in gold. She breathed in the warmth, feeling the weight of tension lift, replaced with clarity and peace. She knew she would never forget the desert, the night, or the Apache who had saved her, but she also knew that life continued, full of opportunity, strength, and the quiet joy of survival. The story of fear, courage, and trust had reached its end, leaving her ready to live with the knowledge that even in the wildest night, hope and bravery could guide the way. And with that, she stepped forward, leaving the shadows behind, carrying with her the lessons, the courage, and the promise of a life shaped not by fear, but by the strength she had discovered and the bond that would remain forever.